Hello, and welcome to episode 87 of the Hike Like a Woman podcast. I hope everyone is having a wonderful new year so far. We took some time away to spend some time with our families this past holiday season, and we hope that you enjoyed time with your family as well. On this week's episode, we talked to Suzanne Roberts, who wrote the book Almost Somewhere, 28 Days on the John Muir Trail. We actually read this book this past year in our Hike Like a Woman Adventure Book Club. If you are not a part of our Hike Like a Woman Adventure Book Club, search for it on Facebook. We read a different book every month and host weekly discussions. This week, Rebecca had the pleasure of talking with the author about her life, her journey, her writing. She even gives some pretty good tips for some of us who are beginner writers out there, and letting us know about her journey in general. Please sit back, enjoy, and listen to this amazing interview with our founder, Rebecca, and the author of Almost Somewhere, Suzanne Roberts.
Hi, Suzanne. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it is a beautiful fall day here in southeastern Wyoming. Where are you doing this interview right now?
I am sitting at my kitchen table looking out over Lake Tahoe. I live in South Lake Tahoe, California.
Oh man, it's so pretty there.
It is pretty.
Are the leaves changing, or is it almost winter?
No, the leaves have just started to change, although we have a really small window for that. We have the leaf baskins are changing at the higher elevations, so it's really, really beautiful. It's a perfect time to hike, actually, right now in Tahoe.
So what's your favorite local hike? If you have, I don't know, like 2-3 hours to kill, in the evening or early in the morning before work, where do you go?
Well, those are two questions, right? And
yeah,
it's one of those things. I mean, there are hundreds of hikes, within 5 minutes of my house. So I was thinking about this, and it depends on the season where I would go. But for me, I mean, I hike almost every single day just from my front door. There's a hike that I did actually yesterday right outside my door. It goes all the way up to High Meadow, and you get really great views of Friel Peak and Job's Peak and Job's Sister. And then you can go on from there to Star Lake. And then from there, if you wanted to, you could hook into the Tahoe Rim Trail, which hooks into the Pacific Crest Trail. And you can actually walk from my house to Canada or Mexico. And I've actually walked home from Yosemite to my front door. So that's the hike I do every day. But if I were going to give advice to someone coming to Tahoe, I would say definitely in the summer when the flowers are really beautiful, or when the colors are changing in the fall, to go up to Carson Pass. Anywhere in the Hope Valley area, actually. But Carson Pass is really beautiful those 2 times of year. If you want to do kind of a peak bagging trip, you can actually go up to Armstrong Pass, and you can go up Friel, Job's Sister, and Job's Peak, which actually 7 of my girlfriends and I did 3 days ago.
Awesome.
And you can hit all 3 peaks over 10,000 feet. And then Desolation Wilderness is really beautiful, but it's really crowded in the summer. So it's, again, great early season and late season.
Okay, you've just planned my trip to Tahoe. So thank you. I
could keep going, but I won't.
That is great. I love it. It's so pretty there. So in addition to being a hiker and just an all-around awesome outdoor woman, you're also a writer. And
I am.
National Geographic traveler. I think they once said that you are the next great travel writer. How can you talk to me a little bit about writing, how you got started writing, and then maybe some of the things that you've written?
Sure. Well, as you might guess, hiking and writing, they go together in some ways, and then they don't in others, because to write, you have to sit on a chair. But I've always been a writer, and I think most people who are drawn to writing, not that they always pursue it, but I think they always sort of knew that they wanted to tell stories and to write. And I've been writing stories since I was a little girl. I used to write little books and draw pictures, and my mom would tape them together. I still have some of them. And so I was always really drawn to writing. And I didn't know when I was back in college that was like a thing you could major in. So I actually have a degree in biology. And it wasn't until I graduated and I realized, oh, people actually get degrees in writing and English and those kinds of things. So I went back and did my graduate work in that. But I've always been a writer, and hiking and running and being outside, actually, I'm writing in my head when I'm doing those things. So when I'm at home writing and I take a break to go out for a walk or a run or something, I can work out a problem in my head. And so I think the two do go together, even though they seem opposed. And I have been working on actually 3 different manuscripts, and they all are travel-based. So I actually just, I'm just finishing one right now that's about sort of trying to find happiness through travel, through self-discovery, all of that, and going through sort of trying to figure out who I was as a young woman, and so that book is almost finished.
So, what does your typical day look like as a writer and as a teacher and as an outdoor woman?
Well, it's really funny because you've caught me in the biggest transition of my life. I taught college for 20 years. I mean, since I was 24, I was teaching college, so a little longer than 20 years actually. And I've always worked. I've worked jobs since I was 15 years old, and I just quit my job.
Oh, good for you.
So, yeah, it's really exciting. And so I quit my full-time teaching job at Lake Tahoe Community College to pursue a life of a writer. So I'm in transition now. I'm trying to write in a normal balanced schedule, because when I was teaching, I would binge write, go down the rabbit hole for 14, 15 hours a day, where I wouldn't shower for days. My husband would come and he'd say, "Oh my God, you need to take a shower, get out of your pajamas," and then I would work, and I put everything into my students, and then I would binge when I had time. And I find myself, I quit my job and I started binge writing, and I realized I'm not going to be able to sustain this for the next 30 or 40 years. So I have to find a balance. So actually hiking and being outside is helping me to figure out that I can't just sit in my chair for 14 hours, So I'm actually, I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm finding the balance right now.
Just Go Travel Studios helps customers plan and remember great vacations. They have detailed planning guides for over 25 national parks for $6 or less. But you really have to check out their custom vintage style posters. Amy and Pete will take one of your photos and turn it into a unique national park style poster or postcard that you're guaranteed to love. Hike Like a Woman podcast listeners can get 15% off by using the promo code Hike Like a Woman.
So I like that you mentioned finding balance, because I think as women, that's something that we all struggle with, whether we like to admit it or not. And how do you find balance when you quit your job? What are you doing? Are you spending a lot of time outside? Are you doing a lot of reflection, journaling? How are you trying to find balance with this new transition?
Well, I sort of plan my days. I write things down that I want to accomplish, and that and I'll even have go for a run on the list.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been doing a lot of revision on this manuscript that I've mentioned. I'm also trying to dive into a new manuscript. So I'll try to balance with seeing friends, seeing my husband, going outside, and I'm not always great at it, but I think writing it down, and having a plan of what I want to accomplish, and that sort of helps me. I'm also teaching part-time in an MFA program. So I'm mentoring, graduate students with their own writing. And so I spend some of my time, when my packets come in, I spend some time with student work, and I talk to them, over the course of the semester. It's long distance, it's a low residency program at Sierra Nevada College. And so I do spend time doing that as well. And I am in an interesting situation where I don't actually live with my husband. So I have a lot of time, which is really great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't live with my husband because I was working at Lake Tahoe Community College, and he lives in Sacramento. He works there. And now I realize that I'm still not going to live with him full time because I can't leave the wilderness. I can't leave Tahoe. I can't leave the outdoors.
Uh-huh.
So, I go down there, he comes up here, and I'm seeing him more often for sure. But I'm like, I'm so invested in sense of place that I would, that I'm sort of choosing place over my husband, even though I love him and we're really happy. So yeah, if you want to be a writer, it's a good arrangement.
That's interesting. It's interesting how sometimes you just got to make it work with whatever
Yeah.
you're passionate about. And if your partner supports you, then it works.
Yeah, he's super supportive. In fact, he's my biggest cheerleader. Like, he's always asking, have you been writing? What are you working on? You need to write. And I just found out I got a 1-month residency in Alabama, a writing residency.
Mm-hmm.
And I called him and I said, what do you think? It's a month, and he's like, Suzanne, you're a writer. You have to do these are the kinds of things writers do. They go to residencies. And I was like, you're right. So he's really amazing and supportive.
That's awesome. So I got to ask you this question. Why do you write? Is it to share your experiences? Is it because you hope that when you write about one of your adventures, somebody else might be inspired to take a particular adventure? But what is it? What drives you to get up in the morning and put words on a page?
Well, it's interesting. The first thing that popped in my head was, well, I don't really have a choice.
Right.
No, it's true. And people who write kind of get that. It's like, oh, I sort of have to do this. But that answer is sort of vague. So I'll try for a better answer. I think that initially I write to figure things out. Like, I write because I have some kind of issue that I'm not sure how to think about it. And so initially, often I will write something that isn't intended for an audience, but it's just, blah on the page. And it's not very good and it's not very well crafted. And every single writer writes crappy first drafts. It's just the fact of the matter. And so I'll write that, and then I might see something in it and I might think, maybe somebody else needs this story, And so when I choose to revise something out of my journal, I've got like thousands of journals from the time I was a little girl, so I've kept them all. And sometimes I'll look through them and I'll think, oh, that's a story that somebody might need. And so then I try to use all the elements of craft that I've learned over the last 25 years to make it a story for an audience. And I think it's to connect. I think I just want to sort of connect with other people.
Yeah. And there's a way to connect with written word and spoken.
Yeah.
I mean, because people read your stories out loud too. It's not just something you read before bed alone. Interesting. Right, to connect. So we have a lot of aspiring writers in our Hike Like a Woman community. What piece of advice would you give to someone who might have, like you mentioned, collections of journals and diaries and might want to share them with others, but might be too scared that their work might not be good enough or might not resonate with somebody? What advice would you give to a young aspiring writer?
Well, I would say that every writer I know, even the most, like the famous ones that you think, oh, they must have so much confidence. Every writer is worried about that. Every writer thinks that whatever she has to say isn't interesting enough. So you have to just kind of let that go, and you have to trust in the fact that if you're drawn to write and tell a story, you have to trust that the world needs it. And holding it back from the world is selfish. Like, it is a generous act to write and give it to the world. And so you have to just kind of trust in that. You also have to not be too attached to your own work. You can't hate it too much, or you'll never want to revise it and do anything with it. But you also can't love it too much, because then you aren't willing to change it and revise it and do the work that's necessary to get it into the hands of an audience. But as far as solid advice for an aspiring writer is to read. Read like a maniac. Read everything. Read books. Read poetry. Read read books that you want to write books like. Read fiction. Read everything you can get your hands on. Samuel Johnson once said, in order to make a book, a man, of course he said a man, but he meant, I think, a woman too, but he just didn't know that back then.
Sure.
A man needs to turn over an entire library, meaning that if you want to write a book, you can't do it until you've read a library of books. And when I teach writing classes, I have students walk in, I see their work and I say, oh, you're a reader. And they'll say, how do you know? And it's like, because you can write. If you read a lot, you will know how to write. So that's the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is take a class. Wherever you live, there's got to be workshops or even creative writing classes at your local community college. You may think, oh, there's a stall full of kids or whatever. Well, my creative writing classes at the community college, most of the students were older than I am. There were people coming back wanting to write stories for whatever reason. And then the last is find other people like you and get into a writing group. My writing group is invaluable to me.
Now I got to do some research on writing groups and classes in my community. That's interesting advice. I like that you talk about the support of others, and
yeah.
you don't have to write it alone. And I think that's very valuable. And I think a lot of times we might envision writing as just this solitary act, but bringing a community into it, community that helps you and wants you to succeed, that's huge.
It is huge. And I might add that my writing group is all women. And I would not be in a writing group with men, at least not right now, because of the way that we support each other. And there are lovely men. I have lovely male writer friends that are wonderful people. But when I'm drafting, and that's a really vulnerable place to be, I want my first audience to be women. I just do. So if you're a woman, you might look for a group that's all women, just because there's something to that. There really is.
I think that's, yeah. I think when we're letting ourselves be vulnerable, as you mentioned, and opening up our hearts with our story that we're passionate about, that supportive network is important. That's awesome. So we talked a little bit about vulnerability, but also I feel like as soon as you write something, be it a blog post or your first novel, there's instantly critics, and the critics instantly come out and they're going to pick apart your work, your baby, your masterpiece. How do you deal with the critic? How do you deal with criticism?
Well, I mean, I have faced lots and lots of criticism. One of the early readers of Almost Somewhere, my hiking memoir, was a man, and I didn't know him, but the book had originally gone to a different university press. And the way it works is that when it goes out, they would have some outside readers to weigh in whether the press should publish this book or not. And one of the readers, the early readers, absolutely hated the book. Like, went on to say that I should never write another word, that my humor was unseemly. Unseemly? Who says that? Like 19th century. And
No.
And just that my writing was narcissistic, and it was egotistical, and it was uninteresting. And part of that is that I think women face that often. It's like when women tell their stories, all of a sudden we are the ones who are nasal gazing, we are the ones who are narcissistic. But you can find all kinds of, essays and memoirs by men that are all about what they think of the world and their lives, and no one ever says that. So part of it is you just have to realize that sometimes people don't want to hear your story, and that's not about you. It's about them, and it doesn't matter. The other thing is, which I always think about, is I'm going to be dead for sure in 50 years, right? Or at least 75 for sure. No question, dead. And so, like, who cares? I mean, time is so short, and who cares? Who cares? In 75 years, I'll be gone. It won't matter. So why would I take that personally? And who cares what people think, And I have published some really personal stories. I mean, I published an essay just recently in the magazine Creative Nonfiction about cheating on my first husband. I published with them an essay about having an abortion. And so I know that I am opening myself up to criticism. But what we have to remember is when we write, we're holding up a mirror to our audience. So whatever that audience is saying, they might hate me. They don't hate me. They hate themselves. And I understand that. And so it really helps. And now when I get criticism, I love to try to pick it apart and say, okay, there's something in this that's going to teach me how to be a better writer. So I like constructive criticism. Of course, if someone's just mean, they're just mean. But I still, even if they're mean, that guy, he helped me make my book better because he hated my narrator, and so did I. And I realized I needed more of a double vantage point. And I still, in that book, probably don't have enough of a double vantage point, like the older narrator looking back in. So on my next book, I'm really working on that. So he helped me, even though he was meanie. So be just hungry for criticism. I mean, all we want is to get better at what we're doing. So it's the best way to get better is to listen.
And it's hard to do that if we don't have the humility to listen to. Sometimes my own arrogance gets in the way of criticism that could make me better. It's tough.
What do you mean? What do you mean by arrogance?
I think sometimes we think we're doing a great job. And then when somebody comes in from the outside and says you're not doing a great job, it's hard to be humble enough to listen to those comments, especially when they're coming at you from a negative light.
Yeah, well, when I'm writing, I pretty much never think I'm doing a great job.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. See, you're already in that place where you can take it and it rolls off your back and you can learn from it. See, that's great. That's good.
But you can't be too insecure either. You got to be in the middle.
Right. There's this happy medium, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Adorable apparel for toddlers from Doodle Pants are crafted to spark the imaginations of your little ones while providing comfortable, practical options for a wide range of activities, from swimwear to hooded sweatshirts to their signature Doodle Pants leggings. You can find vibrant, comfy, and affordable apparel for your toddler that you'll love. All of their products are designed to fit the unique needs of a young child. From leggings that fit easily over a diaper, to bath towels fitted with a cozy hood to keep them extra warm after bath time. Explore their full selection of apparel for toddlers and babies at www.doodlepants.com. That's Doodlepants, DOODLEPANTS.com, and see how cheerful styles can light up the wardrobes of your boys and girls.
And you're also a poet. So talk to me about poetry. What do I need to know? How do I read poetry and enjoy it?
Well, there's all kinds of poetry. Sometimes my students would tell me they didn't like poetry, and I would say, well, that's like saying you don't like food.
Right.
There's all the kinds. You might not like hamburgers, but you might like sushi. So saying you don't like poetry often is because you've only read certain prescribed kinds of poetry, that you learned maybe in high school, and it was difficult to understand because the language was archaic and all of that. So I would say that, that reading widely and reading contemporary poetry, and maybe starting with poetry that's more narrative, that tells stories. So like for people who really love nature, Mary Oliver, I mean, she's got poems that are really inspirational and tell a story. And she's sort of a good one to start with. If you're interested in sort of world history and politics, Carolyn Porche is a great poet that she's very lyrical, but you also sort of can figure out what's going on. And Elizabeth Bishop is an amazing poet. She writes a lot of travel poetry and place-based poems. And so some of these writers are writers that are easy to understand and enjoyable. And in fact, when I get stuck writing, I go right to poetry because it's all about the language. And in some ways, a poem is like a photograph, whereas maybe an essay or a memoir is more like a movie. So a poem is a snapshot. The writer doesn't explain things to you. They just sort of give you the observations of the world and the language, and then you bring to it like what these images mean. And because some poems are ambiguous, meaning they might mean more than one thing, we feel insecure, like, oh, I can't understand that because it might mean this or this. Well, that should be really like a good thing, that it could be this or this. And I tell my students, you're never going to be wrong. You might be unsupported. Like if you read a poem about, a honey tree and you say, oh, this is about bowling. Well, there's nothing in the poem that suggests that it might be about bowling. So look at the images, like what's in that poem, and then that way you can sort of play with it and have fun with it and know that you can't really be wrong. So I think reading poems is a great thing, especially for hikers, because a book of poems is a lot, lighter and easier to sort of read a poem a night than a chapter or something if you're going on a long backpacking trip.
That's a good point, because we're always looking to save space. And if poems can have several different meanings, there's a lot to think about when you're on the trail. Perfect. Exactly. So speaking of hiking and adventures, what's been your biggest adventure thus far into your life?
My biggest adventure?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I don't even know how to answer that.
It's like choosing a favorite tree in the forest. Has there been one adventure where you really learned something or something that was really memorable happened?
And you want an outdoor adventure, right?
Or any adventure, just life.
Well, it's an interesting thing because when I have interviews and discussions like this, I always have this sort of answer that I think I should say, like the smart answer that's about the wilderness. And then I have the answer that pops into my head first. Every time, and when you ask that, the first thing I thought of, the thing in my life that has been the biggest adventure, and it wasn't a good adventure, but my mom was sick last year and I was her caregiver and she died. And I'm writing a book about it actually. But to me, that has kind of been the biggest sort of thing, and even going back to quitting my job, somebody said, well, why, what was the impetus? What allowed you to do that? And my first answer was my mom died,
Really?
And so I do think that this sort of idea of being close to death, really somehow creates the impetus for really wanting to live. And so that's the answer. I mean, I've done all kinds of hiking adventures. I mean, I could recommend, a couple months ago, my husband and I hiked the West Highland Way in Scotland, which was a wonderful adventure.
Yeah.
Hiking end to end where they carry your bag for you. So it's not like real backpacking, but you get the sort of cultural and wilderness experience. We did the same thing across England. We did the coast to coast. I've hiked the Inca Trail in Machu Picchu. And so I've done a lot of long distance hiking, and those have been great adventures. And I recommend them, absolutely. But I think that the thing that has had the biggest impact on me is probably going through cancer and death with my mom.
Wow. Do you think it just taught you a little bit about our own fragile lives and mortality, or what do you think it was that created that sense of adventure? Or adventure is not even probably the right word to describe something like losing a parent to cancer, but what was it about the experience?
Well, I think, we were talking about sort of this idea of arrogance and ego and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
When you are, going through something like, a terminal illness, you have to leave a lot of that behind, I also have another really close friend who died of cancer 2 years ago. and she would talk to me about how for her whole life she sort of worried about what she looked like. She had this vanity, and then that sort of fell away because you're not really worrying about that anymore. So the superficiality, that stuff goes, and I think it's this idea of brevity. Like, we always say the cliche, oh, life is short, but cliches are there to make us not think, right? That's why we shouldn't use them when we write, because it's something we've heard so many times, it doesn't have any meaning anymore. But when you really think about, I have 30 more summers to hike in the Sierra. That's real, you can count them. So I think going through that, it helps you see sort of what's superficial and what's real, and also how your own life is really short, and you just better do it now. Whatever you want to do, you just better do it now. Stop trying to get through your days, because that's a waste of time.
Do you like sitting down and reading a good book, but just don't have the time? Why not try Audible? Audible has a selection of thousands of books that you can listen to. So many of our ladies in the Hike Like a Woman Adventure Book Club use Audible to read our monthly books and be able to participate in weekly conversations. If you'd like to try out Audible, go to www.audibletrial.com/hike-like-a-woman. By signing up for Audible, you are supporting Hike Like a Woman and continuing to offer our weekly podcast free of charge to all of you. Thank you so much for your time and for listening to us every single week.
Well, we're kind of coming toward the end of our time together. But before we go, I would like, and this kind of follows along with what we were just talking about with doing it now. What piece of advice would you give to your 12-year-old self if you could go back in time and if your 12-year-old self would listen?
I would tell her to stop apologizing.
Why?
Well, I think as girls and women, we apologize for taking up space. We apologize for talking. We apologize for being our animal selves. And I see it. Teaching now, even, I mean, we've got such a great group of young people who are more open to things, who are, more sensitive to each other. But I still see the young women, oh, I'm sorry. The men will this is of course a stereotype, but they'll interrupt because they're excited about something, and they won't ever apologize. The women, if they feel like they've interrupted, they're like, oh, sorry, I'm sorry. And I have to say to them, stop apologizing. And I did it too, and I still do it. I mean, but when I was 12, I was so afraid of taking up space and of, saying the wrong thing and of not being who everybody else wanted me to be. And I would tell her, stop apologizing for yourself. That's what I would say.
That is great advice. Such good advice.
I'll end on that. I have a lot of other things I would say to her too, but that's enough.
That's all she'd listen to right now. Awesome.
Well, she wouldn't have listened to anything, so.
I know. Such a rough age. Anyway, so Suzanne, where can we find you online, and where can we find your books and learn more about you?
Okay, well, the memoir that's out is called Almost Somewhere, 28 Days on the John Muir Trail, and you can find it anywhere. The best place is the independent booksellers, of course, but you can find it on Amazon or anywhere really, online. And if it's not at your bookstore, they can order it. And I have 4 books of poems out. The books of poems are more difficult to find, certainly, although I think a couple of them are still available by Amazon and other places online. And I've done a lot of writing, travel writing that's been published online. So if you go to my website, which is just SuzanneRoberts.net, you can find a list of all the links to things that I've published online. I published a lot of travel essays with a journal called Matador. And I've also, published with Creative Nonfiction and Brevity and some other places online. So if you go onto my website, it's all kind of right there, and you can just, read whatever you like.
We're going to read it all. We're going to read it all. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me this morning, and that was fun.
Thank you for listening to the Hike Like a Woman podcast. Don't forget to check us out online at www.hikelikeawoman.net. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Looking for a great book? Join our Adventure Book Club, where we read an amazing outdoor book every month and host weekly discussions. Don't forget about our quarterly magazine, with loads of great info from gear to trails and even recipes. Want to go hiking with us? Then check out our local hiking group section on our website to see where the nearest locals group is to you. Thanks for listening and have a wonderful week.